This is Right On Radio, the voice of the real resistance in occupied Europe.
I'm John Morgan, and I'm editor-in-chief of Arctos Media, as well as co-editor of Right On. Tonight, as we often are, I'm joined by the well-known Swedish traditionalist and activist Jonas De Geer. Welcome, Jonas. How are you tonight?
Thanks, John. I'm fine, and good to be on, as always.
We're glad to have you. Tonight, we'll be speaking with two representatives of the NSV, or the Nationalist Student Association in English, which is a Flemish student movement in Belgium with a more than 40-year history of activism in Flanders. Our first guest is Jeroen Bolckmans. Jeroen is the chairman of the NSV, and he's a recent graduate of the Catholic University of Leuven. How are you tonight, Jeroen?
I'm great, thanks.
And we also have the pleasure of being joined by Frederik Vandelannoote. Frederik was the chairman of the NSV chapter in Hasselt during his student years, and he's currently editor-in-chief of Branding, the journal of the NSV. He received a degree in industrial engineering and mechanics from the Technical University of Hasselt, and he is currently employed at the Stella Artois Brewery in Leuven in optimizing their maintenance process. He is currently also serving as the chairman of the alumni fraternity OSB, which brings together former NSV members. So how are you tonight, Frederik?
Hey, hello, John. Thanks for having us on the show. I'm very good.
I'll mention that my colleague Daniel Freeberg and I were just in Antwerp about 2 weeks ago to attend an NSV event, and it's the second one that I've attended to date. And I can happily report to all of our listeners that the NSV extended the best hospitality to us. And the enthusiasm and positive attitude of the NSV members who I encountered was both encouraging and infectious. So thanks to both of you very much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. No problem. It's a little bit in our culture to be hospitality and give a lot of beers and drinks.
Yes. Well, all aspects of the event were good, but that was good also. I always look forward to my trips to Flanders to hang out with you guys. So I thought we would start out by perhaps, Jeroen, you can speak first. Just tell me a little bit about the history of the NSV, what its origins are, and maybe something about its significant achievements over the last 40 years.
Well, as you said, John, the NSV exists for almost 40 years. Next year will be 40. But we have a history that goes a little further back. The Flemish student movement exists since the beginning of the 20th century. At first, it was mainly a cultural movement, also on the same plane as the cultural Flemish movement. And throughout the years, it radicalized and it became a nationalist movement. And in the 60s, the then dominant nationalist or Flemish Nationalist Student Association, the KVHV, became infected with Marxists, and the NSV became a split from the KVHV, and it exists until today as a radical nationalist student association. So throughout the years, we stood for a Flemish independence and a right-wing conservatism. In the 70s, for example, the new right ideals became introduced in Flanders through the NSV, amongst other organizations. We have chapters in all the big student cities, and throughout the years, of course, there are always heights and lows for student associations. Each 5 years, your generation is completely changed into a new group of people that are students at that time. But we have always been present, and we've always had a serious influence also on the rest of the nationalist movement in Flanders.
Could you tell us a little bit about what constitutes the particular Flemish identity? For those who are not aware, if you put it in relation to, say, the Dutch, as in Holland, or the French, what's typical about the Flemish? What constitutes it is a better word. Yeah.
Well, historically, you could say that the Flemish are actually the Dutch living in Belgium. Historically, Belgium is quite an artificial state, and its origin lies in 1830. It was created as sort of a buffer state between France and Holland. The French were planning to annex it, but it has no real identity, Belgium as a state.
And this was after the Napoleonic Wars, basically.
That's right.
Yes, yeah.
And during the decades that Belgium existed, there were actually two groups of people that lived there. In the south, you have the French-speaking people, the Walloons, and in the north, we speak Dutch. So historically, we are Dutch, but throughout the years, sort of a Flemish identity evolved out of that.
What is the view of regionalist organizations such as the NSV? You describe yourselves as nationalists towards Belgium as a state. Is there a conflict there, or do you actually see it as a multifaceted identity where you can be both Belgian and Flemish simultaneously?
Well, I think if you look at Belgium, you see the history of a failed state and of two peoples that were forced together, and it wasn't a happy marriage. So we do believe that Flanders should be an independent country and should search to cooperate again with the Netherlands, because we share a lot more with the Dutch than we do with the Walloons. That does not mean that we are chauvinistic or that we seek the conflict with the Walloons. We also have a European ideal, and we would gladly cooperate with Wallonia as a good neighbor.
That's actually something that's kind of interesting. Do you have any contact with Walloon regionalist or nationalist groups, or are you pretty much just focused on the Flemish aspect of things?
Well, there are not a lot of Walloon regionalist or separatist organizations, actually. So we do have contacts with a couple of individuals in Wallonia, but you don't have a mass movement there like you do in Flanders. So
I see.
Yes, and the Walloon nationalists are mostly Belgium nationalists. So they want to keep the Belgium state. So that's a difficulty to cooperate, of course.
But you think this dispute can be resolved through democratic means, or do you imagine at some point that you'll have to have strikes or something like that to achieve independence for Flanders?
Well, actually, we have 60% of the Belgians are Flemish, so we could get a democratically an independent state, but we don't do it. So I think there's a little bit more than just a democratical movement towards independence to get independence.
Well, also something I wanted to bring up was something that always strikes me whenever I attend one of your events is the fact that there's a sort of uniform that NSV members always wear when you're involved in events where you wear the NSV sash and the cap as well. Maybe you could describe that for our listeners.
Yes, so the Flemish students, and that's not only the political students like the NSV, but the student organizations in general, historically they are based on the German Burschenschaften. So the sash and the cap are present with the Burschenschaften, and those traditions became prevalent in Flanders as well during, I believe, the 1920s. Most organizations don't wear them the same way as we do anymore, but as a traditional movement, we try to preserve those parts of our identity, also the student folklore that it entails. And it's not just the caps and the hats, but we do cantuses, which are sort of ritual evenings where we drink a beer and sing songs in a cellar that's lit with candles, and there are certain Latin formulas that are brought there. It's sort of a romantic student tradition that we try to preserve.
Oh, I like that. I think that must be good at building up camaraderie among your members.
Yes, it's the most important part of building an organization. You have your identity, you have your lectures, you have your action, but you also have to form a comradeship, and that is done by that sort of activities. So it's really important, and lots underestimate that or don't take it seriously, but it's quite important to build a lot of comradeships between our members.
And what sort of relationship does NSV have with the various academic institutions where its members are students? Because I imagine that in Belgium, like in the rest of Western Europe, universities tend to be dominated by leftists now. And I know that, like when I spoke at one of your events last April, actually the university wouldn't allow us to hold the event on university property. So what sort of opinion do the academic institutions have of the NSV?
Well, historically, it has been difficult at certain points in history. So in the early years of the NSV, there was a serious conflict between the NSV, which was actually one of the only counterweights against this leftist hegemony at the universities. And each demonstration could count on a counter demonstration with 10 times as many protesters. Each time we held an event at the university, the entrances were blocked, and there were a lot of physical conflicts as well. So it was a very grim period. Today, most students are more apathic, so they are certainly not as leftist as before. And the universities, the institutions even recognize us. At the 3 major universities in Flanders, we are recognized, and we get subsidies and access to the auditoria. But sometimes when the leftists threaten to beat everyone up again, the university bows and they become afraid, and then we have to relocate.
So really, the universities actually support you, and it's only when these leftist groups actually threaten you that it becomes an issue.
Supporting, I would not call it. I would rather call it tolerated.
Okay.
Because they are racism laws. But they have to tolerate us. Only if the danger gets too far, they get a preliminary to get us out of their universities.
Yeah, as a Swede, I'm quite surprised actually, because I don't think that a clearly sort of nationalist student organization would be tolerated at universities in Sweden. I mean, it might be an extreme country in that regard, but I'm still positively surprised for once that the climate is, shall we say, relatively tolerant then in Belgium.
Yes, but you also said it was a struggle of 30 years. And now it's since 10 years only that we have been recognized at universities. So it didn't.
No, absolutely. No, and I quite appreciate that, if you've been around for 40 years, it must have been very difficult in the beginning in the early 70s when the militant left was very dominant in many ways. So it must have sort of come out of that kind of situation, the whole culture of the organization. Yeah.
Well, I can actually say when I was supposed to speak last year, the Antifa was very militant. I mean, they actually threw paintballs at the the hotel that I was staying in, which apparently led to a crisis at the highest levels of the Flemish government to stop this conference.
Is that the best they can do? Paintballs?
Apparently, yes. I mean, I'm grateful it wasn't more than that, but yeah,
it's usually more threatening than real danger. So,
but of course, I mean, in Flanders these days, you have a bigger problem than just the Walloons or the Belgian state. You also have, like the rest of Western Europe, this huge influx of so-called migrants. Although, I think it's a mistake for us to talk about it as something that just started last year. I mean, immigration into Belgium, I'm sure, just like the rest of Western Europe, started decades ago. But what has been NSV's reaction to immigration and the migrant crisis in particular?
Well, we have been a fierce critic of immigration since the early years. So That's one of the core points that we stressed during our existence. Of course, we are nationalists. We do not hate people who are different from us, but we do believe that every people should have the right to live according to its own identity on its own soil. And when you start mixing hundreds of thousands of people through each other, it leads to conflicts. And I do believe the last year that we have seen these conflicts intensifying and coming in a faster pace, with the things that happened in Cologne, with the attacks in Paris. I do believe that it's looking a bit grim on that issue.
Have you seen an increase in your support in recent months because of the migrant crisis and the attacks in Paris?
There have been a couple of people who responded and who are now looking to join the NSV. I won't say that it is a massive surge in membership, but there have certainly been some responses.
Mm-hmm. So how has Belgium in general suffered from this great influx of call them just migrants, because it's as John just said, it's not a refugee crisis in the proper sense of the word in any way. Sweden and Germany, for example, have been very much hit by this wave of migrants. So what about Belgium?
I have the impression that in Belgium, the people actually don't care anymore, because it's already a long problem that lasts a long time, immigration. Immigration was an important party politics point in the early 90s, which was the breakthrough of the party Vlaams Blok in 91. So it's since then it's a topic in politics. So it's never gone away, and now we see it increased even more, but we aren't surprised anymore. So we have a lot of problems with immigration for a long while. So we're not surprised that it increases and gets worse.
Okay, and it's something that people can talk openly about in was say general party politics and in the media and.
In the media, you only hear the typical political correct interpretation of what's happening. Of course, like in Sweden and Germany and the other more tolerant countries in Europe. But I do believe that in Flanders, as probably in the rest of Europe, the silent majority is very much opposed to what's happening right now.
Can you tell us a little bit about Vlaams Blok and what happened to it?
And also maybe something about your own relationship with Vlaams Blok and Vlaams Belang, if there is any with NSV, I'd be curious to know. But
first, it's important to stress that we are not the student association of Vlaams Blok, Vlaams Belang, but it's rather the way around. So the founding members of Vlaams Blok were almost for 90% NSV members. So it really is created out of the NSV background. And
that's
almost all parliamentary MPs which are currently in Vlaams Belang have also NSV background. But it's not the other way around. It's not if the party has some ideological or a political program that we immediately translate it or use it. We are more independently, ideologically. We have our own discourse, we have our own ideas, and we influence the party a lot, but not the other way around.
So you could say NSV is almost a meta-political organization.
Yes, there was a student who wrote a thesis about the NSV a couple of years ago, and he called it the NSV as a meta-political vanguard. So I think you could say that the NSV is the place, the ID factory for the nationalist movement, and Vlaams Blok, Vlaams Belang was certainly one of the principal expressions of that nationalist movement.
But Jonas, you had a question about what happened to Vlaams Blok? I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, that's fine. No. But exactly, Vlaams Blok was forbidden, wasn't it? It was banned. in Belgian politics, and that's what led to the reformation as Vlaams Belang.
Yes, that's the official version. That's also the version that Vlaams Belang.
But please
will
enlighten us, because this is interesting. Whatever happened to Vlaams Blok? Because it used to be
Vlaams Blok is very ideologically correct and radical in his starting days. It was solidaristic, so it had very new and fresh ideas on how to reorganize economically the society, and it had lots of conservative ideas, ethically conservative. It was against immigration, of course, but against immigration and not against solely, let's say, Islamization, but against the whole immigration. And it was very conservative concerning our identity, to keep our identity. And gradually, when it grew bigger, it also more had, the message had to be more soft, because they became more parliamentarialized. So the strategy or the goal was not anymore to change the society or to gain real power, but to gain parliamentary seats. So they thought that anything would change if they had more.
It became more populist.
It became more populist. It became more, more oriented, clientelistic also. So orientated on their own money, because they were in parliament for 20 years. It get used to it. It paid a lot, and so they were campaigning to keep their parliamentary seats, but not to gain power. So they didn't reinvest it in middle politics or counter culture activities and so on. And then became the process. They get convicted by racism, but the softening already happened before that. They wanted to break the cordon sanitaire, which is the exclusion by other parties of Vlaams Belang to cooperate in the government. So, but before that, actually the evil already started, and after that they had to reform to be within the law. And it get only worse. They get only more soft. And but now they are back a little bit progressing and
on the right track.
Yes,
they didn't do so well in the last elections, though, did they?
The last 10 years, I think the party lost almost all of its elections. But recently you can see that the popularity is on the rise again. So I do believe that in the coming years they might come back on that field.
Now, but sorry, John. But
go ahead.
Even if you're not representatives of Vlaams Belang, would you still say that you support them, even though they have flaws? I mean, I understand that you see that everything is not perfect, but would it be the party of your choice, or is there any other sort of political force in Belgian politics that you would rather support?
For me, I'd certainly support Vlaams Belang, and yes.
For me also, because there is no really other alternative. You have N-VA, which is liberal conservative, but they're liberals. So
no, but that's so that's very much fair enough. So
yeah, it says it all.
Yeah.
But Vlaams Belang, we keep be critical about it. So, but it's necessary for the party also that it gets some counterweight out of NSV, so that it gets on track and it follows a correct path.
Yeah. If only the Sweden Democrats would have something like that, but anyhow.
Yeah, it's in Hungary. It's sort of like the relationship between Fidesz and Jobbik. Jobbik is always forcing Fidesz to move further to the right in order to maintain their advantage, as it were. And it's a good relationship, I think. But are there any other? You mentioned the liberal conservatives. Are there any other notable nationalist groups or student organizations in Flanders besides the NSV and Vlaams Belang?
There are several other organizations. Those two parties are the only notable parties on the right. You do have another student association, so the KVHV, out of which we were a separation. Today they are ideologically more conservative again, but they are openly Catholic, and they are more conservative while the NSV is more radical.
I see.
There's also groups like the Delta Stichting, which is like the Flemish branch of the Groupement de Recherche et d'Études pour la Civilisation Européenne, so a new right think tank, actually. You have Voorpost, which is a nationalist action group. There are several other smaller organizations as well.
More cultural or meta-political organizations, that political parties, I guess.
Yes, or for example, we have sort of a youth movement, like the Scouts, but sort of a nationalist Scouts here, the VNJ, Flemish National Youth League.
Oh, interesting. And do you have a relationship with any of these organizations, or are they sort of competitors of yours?
They aim for I believe children from 3 or 4 years and older, so they're not really competition for the NSV. A lot of people from nationalist families, they start in the youth league, and then they come to the student association, and then they become active in one of the other organizations on the right. So we are a big family of nationalist organizations, you could say.
Oh, that's great. So there's something for every Flemish person at every stage of life, you could say.
Yes, actually, yes.
Oh, that's great. Okay, on that note, we're having a very good discussion, but we're going to just take a short break. This time we're going to be listening to the song Blood of Our Fathers by the Arctos house band, Winglord. So enjoy that, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. we're back, and thanks to our house band, Winglord, for that great song. To get back into the discussion, you have mentioned, both of you have kind of made NSV out to be a primarily metapolitical organization, which I think is wonderful, because that's also the sort of work that Arctos and Right On are engaged in. But I'm just curious, I realize that because you have many different members, many people will have different perspectives and different points of view on things, but I realize that you're much more than just a regionalist organization. I mean, in the past, you've had not only myself and my colleague Daniel as guests at your events, but you've even had Alexander Dugan last year and Manuel Oxenreiter. So I realize that NSV must have an interest in having a much broader perspective. So what do you see as the chief metapolitical influences and perhaps also goals of the NSV, both organizationally and also for yourselves personally?
Well, I think you are right to say that we have a broader goal than just a regionalist goal. So from the beginning onwards, the NSV was meant to be more than just about Flemish independence, but about a sort of integral nationalism. And in the first years, the first generation was very much inspired by the interwar Flemish nationalism, which was sort of a Flemish variant of the conservative revolution. And then the second generation became very influenced by the French New Right. And during the years, different ideas have always been introduced and explored throughout the NSV. I don't think we have really a fixed ideology. There is possibility for discussion. People can differ in their ideas. That's also one of the nice things of being a student association and not a party. Not everyone has to follow the same program.
Well, I guess you've mentioned the conservative revolution in Germany and the French New Right as among your main influences, which I suppose is how you got in contact with Arctos, since of course those are two of our primary, the two schools that we're primarily concerned with.
That's right. That's certainly right. I think we are very much on the same ideological spectrum.
So what I realize you don't have an ideology, but if you could maybe just name a few principles that are of primary concern to the NSV, what would those be?
Well, I think our nationalism is meant as an ideology that strives for the independence of the nation, of course, and the preserving our identity. This independence is not only against Belgium, against the Belgian state, but also when the European Union starts to become very cosmopolitan, it's something we are wary about. Or when the Americans or the NATO try to lure us into adventures, that's something that we are wary about. So we stand for our independence. On the other hand, I think that our nationalism also tries to be sort of a third positionist ideology against both communism and capitalism, both socialism and liberalism, in rejecting the materialism and the materialistic tenets that both of those ideologies share.
Is there any particular religious orientation that NSV members share, or is that something you try to avoid getting into?
Well, actually, it's getting more important, and I think more members are getting interested in it because we now are facing a materialist, individualistic society, which has bring liberalism. So there is no value in life anymore, and people see, oh, life is realistic, it's a problem, and they are starting to find some meaning for their life. And of course, nationalism is a meaning in life because you have something which is higher than yourself, you have your people. But above that, you have, of course, the ultimate reality, and that's God. So there is also a religious perspective, and that's also why we are quite conservative in ethical viewpoint, because we want to respect the natural hierarchy. And that's why we have lots of Catholics in our movement, but also quite a lot of pagans. So, but they are well-educated pagans. They are not just wannabe pagans who have never read a book. So
New Age pagans.
yeah, that kind of stuff. So it's quite interesting. You see the two kind of religions actually fighting against each other, teasing each other, and they are getting each other. We learn a lot of each other and our differences. So it's quite interesting.
That is nice to hear, actually. I can say as a Catholic myself from a Protestant country, but yeah, that's good to hear.
Well, it really seems like NSV, for a regionalist organization from a very small part of Europe, that for myself coming from the United States, I mean, we would hardly ever hear about Flanders except in the context of the First World War. But you guys really have not only, I would say, a geopolitical, but a metaphysical perspective on what you're doing.
Is there?
Sorry
to interrupt, but is there sort of any kind of urge to be reunited to the Netherlands or to Holland, or is that sort of ruled off? I mean, I agree that Belgium is an artificial state, but the logical question then is, of course, do you want complete independence, or would you like to sort of reunite the way, say, the Ulster Republicans want to reunite with the state of Ireland, for example, or the Republic of Ireland?
There are different viewpoints on that binnen NSV, because the Belgium reality is 180 years from now, and we have been separated 180 years from the Dutch. So that leaves a cultural mark behind. The Netherlands evolved quite into the Anglo-Saxon culture. It is very liberal, very progressive, while the Flemish are more a quiet people, and they are more traditional. And you can see the influence of the Catholic Church in the Flemish culture, while you have the liberal Protestant influence in the Netherlands. And we are more German-minded. The Netherlands are more Anglo-Saxon-minded. So it's quite a difference after 180 years. And that's why there are different viewpoints within NSV. Some say, it's our original homeland. We have to come unite again. And others say, oh no, it's now a reality of 180 years of separation. Let's keep Flanders independent.
Interesting.
But it's to be discussed, really, NSV.
What is the mood of not just the people in the NSV, but among the Flemish people in general on these issues?
The people in general who are not occupied with history and politics. Actually,
I guess that's true everywhere.
they don't want to unify with the Netherlands. So there is a lot of competition. You see it in everything, in sport games. If it's Belgium against Holland, it's always very loaded. So the people aren't that Holland-minded.
It's also sort of a bit of jealousy. It's the bigger brother that you look up to, like the Dutch. They have some sort of issues with Germany, the same way that a lot of Flemish have issues with Holland, actually.
Well, also, of course, being in Belgium, I mean, you're actually hosting the headquarters of NATO, but I've gathered from what you've said so far that the NSV isn't too favorable towards NATO. But again, in terms of the Flemish people, how do they feel about being involved in all of these military conflicts overseas and so forth?
I think most people don't really know what's really going on there. Also, because the media plays such a role in misinforming people, and when they do that on a topic like immigration, everyone sees the reality. They see that there are problems with criminality and that sort of things. But when it comes to NATO and foreign interventions, I doubt that most people have any idea of what's going on there and what the geopolitical conflicts that are underlying those wars are.
So it sounds like Flanders is in the same situation as the United States in that regard, since most Americans also have very little understanding of what's really going on.
But totally correct. We're totally a people that's in sleep. We're actually too rich, so nobody cares about. They can see their soccer match on TV, they can drink their beer, and nobody cares. So that's the problem.
But I mean, it does come to mind though that when you had the Marc Dutroux scandal in Belgium, is it 20 years ago almost now? Do you remember that?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. I think there was, I mean, it almost sort of brought Belgium to the verge of a popular revolution. You had hundreds of thousands of Belgians out in the streets protesting against the corrupt political system. Has that left a legacy at all? Because that was quite remarkable, actually. I'm old enough to remember it.
Well, it sort of melted away. So there was a momentum of distrust against the system, but there was not really an ideology behind that, or it went together a bit with the rise of the Vlaams Bloc, but I don't think you can say that it really left a serious legacy until today.
Okay.
Well, something we haven't really touched on yet is I know that in addition to your other activities, NSV is also involved in a lot of political demonstrations and manifestations and so forth. Could you tell us maybe about some notable events that NSV has participated in recently or that are perhaps coming up in the near future?
Our activities are centered around three pillars, you could say. You have the traditional studentship, and those are the activities that entail comradeship, just going to have a drink together or doing some leisure activities. You have the political formation, where we try to inform people about our ideas, where we organize debates, we have our magazine. We had the colloquia where you were invited, for example. And then a third pillar is action, political actions, where we do flyering or we have sort of protests, different sort of protests as well. Now, in the coming week, we will also be having our yearly demonstration, which is one of the highlights of the NSV year. It's always a couple of hundred nationalist students that march through one of the major university cities. And yes, it's around the theme pro-nation, pro-border, stop immigration this year.
So. Oh, that's excellent. What is the reaction of the ordinary Flemish people to the NSV? Like when they see you in the streets at these manifestations, or when they see you, wearing your sashes and caps, does it inspire respect in people, or are they kind of indifferent to it, or are they hostile? What kind of reception do you get?
Well, most people are a bit curious about what it is, or they do know most of the time that the sashes mean that we're students. But they are usually quite interested in it. It does give us a bit of attention, and that's always a good thing. Of course, when people start talking to you, you can explain what we do. There are a couple of hostile reactions, of course, but there are also people who are very sympathetic to what we do.
Would you say it tends to be more one or the other, or is it really different from situation to situation?
Yes, I don't think most people have a very, very extreme opinion on the NSV. Most people will feel quite neutral about us.
Well, that in itself is quite interesting because, of course, if in Western Europe, if you come out as a nationalist organization in most countries, it's seen by many people as something very negative. So.
I think it's also because we do not really follow the caricature that most people have of the extreme right. So people try to imagine bald ducks with with combat boots and Celtic crosses on their t-shirts, but we are just regular students that look like any other student, except that we wear the sashes and we have a couple of ideals more than the others.
Yeah, I think that's very important, is that we have to portray ourselves as actually being ordinary people and not things that will turn a lot of people off or scare them even. I think that's a mistake that a lot of nationalist groups made in the past. So I think it's great that NSV has found a way to kind of integrate itself into its surroundings.
Yeah, or I would say, John, that, we've been ordinary people all along, but it's just, sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of people have a lot of young people have started identifying or model themselves rather on the caricature portrayed in the media.
Yeah, this is true.
So it's there's really nothing that any of us stand for which wouldn't have been completely mainstream some 50, 60 years ago.
That's true.
And we need to bear this in mind all the time, that, even though we might be in a relative minority today in certain places, we still do stand for normality.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But, I'm sure you would agree. I mean, there are certainly many nationalists who give us a bad name, either because of the way they conduct themselves in public, or they discredit nationalism by getting involved in scandals.
Tell me about it.
So it sounds like the NSV is very different. You managed to be an organization of young people, but not a ridiculous one, but a serious one, and I think that's to be commended.
Yes, and young students as well. So a lot of people from the NSV, they end up some in party politics, of course, but others do well in life as well. So we have people who are now professors at the university, for example. Those are all well, you could say meta-political steps in the long march through the institutions that we try to do a little about with the NSV.
So you're Gramsciists of the right, like Benoit.
Oh, well, there you go. When you say students, I'm curious. Is it only a university thing, or do you reach down to sort of high school level?
It's only further education. So
all right.
University, but also non-university further education. There is a sort of a sister organization of the NSV for high school students from 15 to 18 years old.
Okay.
But there's also a flow in popularity for that sort of thing. So it's not always as easy to organize and to keep something like that organization alive.
Oh, sure.
But I guess if Frederik is still involved, you must still have a place for people who've graduated and moved on, but you still allow them to participate in the organization afterwards.
Yes, that's correct. Jeroen mentioned in the first part, there is a lot students, generations, they are replaced every 5 years. So there is not a lot of continuation. And that is a problem for the normal day running of NSV. And that's why it's important to have an old student organization, which I am involved. So recently educated and now working old NSVers keep the continuity within NSV. So they help organizing the events, the rallies, the financial stuff, and give advice to the students. So that's the most continuity is given. But also you have the aspect of after student life. So like the Burschenschaften, we also like to implement Lebensbund. So once you are a member of NSV, you will always be a member of NSV, and you keep supporting NSV by donations or by other means. So that's quite important to have a network that supports NSV with in its members CEOs to people in party politics, in publicity, and maybe even in monasteries, priests. We have all kind of old student members, and that give a very interesting meta-political situation that can help NSV and then a broader national movement.
It sounds like you guys have quite an impressive network, I must say.
We're trying to build it, yes.
I do believe we have a couple of dozens of lawyers, for example, who graduated while being in the NSV. So when we have a legal problem, that's also something that we can usually fix.
That must be very useful.
Yeah.
Free legal counsel. I'm just curious also, does the NSV have any relations with other regionalist organizations around the world, like, I don't know, with the Irish separatists or with the like the ETA in Spain or any of these groups, or do you largely just focus specifically on Belgium?
Well, we certainly have sympathy for their regionalist aims, but of course some of those organizations are quite leftist, like the ETA or
Yes.
the IRA. Let's say that we agree on some parts with them, but we are usually more friendly towards them than they are towards us.
The thing is, what happened, and which is interesting when you say that your organization was a sort of breakaway movement from a previous organization that was more or less kidnapped by the 68ers, if you will, les 68ards. That has very much been the case with a lot of these regionalist movements. I live in Scotland. It's definitely the case with the sort of Scottish Nationalist Party. Perhaps not so much by the sort of 68 movement, but still, at its inception, the Scottish Nationalist Party was not leftist in any way. One of the founders was someone like Compton Mackenzie, for example, who was a famous Scottish author. And he converted to Catholicism and all the rest of it. So I mean, this has come fairly recently, but it is true that most of these nationalist movements have been, hijacked by the left.
Well, actually, I remember Jens Dirk, your colleague, telling me that an NSV contingent actually went to a Scottish National Party event, and they actually didn't want the NSV there.
Well, we went to the Independence March in Scotland a couple of years ago, and I do believe that we had agreed to meet sort of a Scottish Nationalist Student Association, but probably they Googled us then and they didn't want to have anything to do with us anymore. So.
No, I mean, there is a Social Democratic Party draped in the St. Andrew's Cross. I mean, that's the sad thing about it. So there's nothing that distinguishes them from Labour, apart from the fact that they want independence from the United Kingdom, or from England, if you will. Apart from that, they're just as politically correct as anyone else.
Oh, I think, don't they actually want an increase in immigration into Scotland?
I think they do. No, they do.
It's very weird, actually, when you see that they want to protect their identity when looking at Britain, but they don't want to protect it against the immigrants.
I know it's insane, but apart from. It's understandable in a sense, because they've. I mean, we should talk about Belgium and not focus on Scotland, of course. But apart from Glasgow, Scotland hasn't really suffered that much from mass immigration. If you go to Aberdeen or Inverness or Dundee, it doesn't look like most other cities in Europe. So it's been quite sheltered, actually, from the whole thing. So I think a lot of Scots are still quite unaware of what's going on, which is a funny thing to say, since it's not that far away from England, where things are awful. But I think, after having lived here for 10 years, I think that's the only reasonable explanation.
Maybe we have to separate about separatist movements and nationalistic movements. So the most separatist movements in Europe are all left, but we lose that in our mind because Flanders is right, it has been right, but actually that's an acceptance in Europe. But the more important thing is, what will you do with your independence? And that's when ideology starts. And then you'll see, we have a vision just for us. Independence is a starting point for real nationalism, for real independence. And yeah.
Absolutely, I think a parallel to the sort of the Belgian situation is what happened what happened in Czechoslovakia. That would be 20 years ago as well, when Slovakia was always more Catholic, more conservative, more rural, etc., than the Czech Republic. And the cultures were so different that they broke away on those grounds. I think the Czech Republic today is probably the most secularized state in Europe, whereas Slovakia is quite sort of conservative along Eastern European lines. It's not far away from Hungary.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah,
certainly the situation is very good here.
Yeah, no, but I think it's very much the same mentality that's around there. So.
Well, I think obviously both of you are involved in an organization that's very successful and obviously has a long history, and I would imagine it's quite unique among such student organizations in the West right now. So I imagine there might be some people listening who either are involved in or are interested in starting something similar to the NSV where they are. So what sort of advice would you have to give people who are interested in either furthering or starting such an organization?
Well, I think that's not something you can really copy from one country to another country, but you have to search from some starting points within your own culture and your own student traditions. And when you have that starting point, you can build a nationalistic movement around it. But it's important to have that historical and traditional connection with the traditions of your people, actually. And that can be for us. It's our German student customs and traditions where you can build on that history. But maybe in another country it can be something else, which is important.
Yes. Well, and I think also, as you've been saying, it's important to maintain yourselves as we could say, right in the sense of the true rights and nationalist organization, and not give in to the temptation to adopt these leftist slogans and practices that some of the other regionalist groups have. Well, I think we're nearing the end for this program, but at this point, we always give our speakers an opportunity to tell us about anything that they want our listeners to be aware of, any upcoming events or activities or other things that you might want to promote. Please go ahead, because we have listeners from around the world. So please go ahead, or websites, whatever you would like people to know about.
So next week, Thursday, the 17th of March, we have our demonstration in the city of Leuven. If anyone would be near Flanders that day, they're always welcome to join us. And for the rest, people can find information about us on www.nsv.be, and they can always contact us if they want to hear more about us, or if they are looking for connections, for example.
Frederik, do you have anything to add?
No, that's the most important. When you're in our country, you can always contact us, and we go and have a beer with you and have a chat. So we'll always do that.
And the food in Flanders is excellent. I can attest that.
Yes, and we have the best beer in the world.
Yes, I can attest to that as well. Okay, well, thank you, both of you, very much for joining us today. And I think it was a great broadcast. And perhaps down the road we can have you on again, and we can talk about how things have developed in the meantime.
Okay, thank you for inviting us.
Oh, certainly. Yes. Thank you for being on.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.